Hello, I am Andrei Lukhin, and you're watching the program Binding. Today we have a very special guest. Among writers, poets and illustrators, today our guest is a person who knows everything about the relations between publishers and authors of books. This is a rather complex relationship. Please welcome today's guest in our studio, a lawyer named Ihor Havrylov.
Игорь, ну вот скажите честно, быть юристом в издательском деле, юристом быть вообще трудно. А насколько я понимаю, издательское...
Ihor, tell me honestly, what is it like being a lawyer in the publishing industry? Generally speaking, the legal occupation is quite difficult, and as far as I understand, publishing in our country is a rather risky business. First of all, today any business in Ukraine is quite risky. Secondly, because there are writers, poets, and so on. Please tell us your understanding of copyright law. Imagine, for example, that I am a writer. I come to the publisher and I want to publish a book. So who wins in the end? Will it be the publisher who agreed to publish my book if the content is interesting for readers, or the author, who I will gladly present his work to the public and say, look, they published my work? In truth, there are practically no winners in the publishing industry. Neither the authors nor the publisher wins in the conditions of the current economic situation in Ukraine. Be that as it may, it is much more likely that an author has more to gain than a publisher. This is purely an individual author. The fact is that an author earns money on his own name, while a publisher earns a sufficient amount of money as a professional intermediary. But on the whole, and in the future, it seems to me that an author achieves greater success in this field than a publisher.
Автор — это более выигравшая фигура на данном поле.
On the other hand, the publisher as an intermediary sets the rules of the game. Up until recently, you cannot go behind a publisher's back, you cannot present your book for public viewing, and you cannot sell it yourself, though sometimes this is possible in our conditions. In other words, a publisher sits on a high golden mountain, has extensive experience, and a well-developed sales network, which ultimately means that the publisher controls the author.
У него есть какой-то опыт, у него есть какая-то сеть продаж, и он автора, скажем так, направляет.
I want to say that we all probably saw this wonderful episode named Buy a Book of Poems from the Author. Some guy standing outside a subway station selling books. There are currently quite a few print houses that print books and text on teacups or t-shirts. They say, bring anything, we'll print it, and then go sell it in the subway. How can one distinguish a truly professional publishing house from a small printing house, and this concept of printing on teacups? And most importantly, what is the advantage of publishing houses? They charge more money for a quality product. For whom? Maybe for the author as well, or not.
Ну, скажем так, большое издательство...
The fact is that a major publishing house can very easily be distinguished. Its products are sold in bookstores and, frankly speaking, online. It has a large portal that anybody can look up and see exactly what literature is available for sale, and I believe that one must focus on the publishing house to find out about the portfolio of books that it offers. This way, it immediately becomes clear who the authors of these books are. As trivial as it may seem, on some covers, you can already see whether people can afford to pay highly experienced illustrators, purchase high-quality paper for printing, and so on. Because a publishing house that cares about authors and wants to sell the books they ordered for printing and pay them money for that will probably invest a bit more money. However, after all said and done, there are exceptions to this rule. But a book must be presented to readers in such a way that its aesthetic appearance captivates their interest, and they make an emotional decision to purchase that book. Once again, I must reiterate that there are publishers that agree to cooperate with authors and print and publish their works, though the physical quality of the books itself is rather poor, and in most cases is not up to quality standards.
Само физическое качество книг, оно такое среднее.
Such is the reality of the publishing world. You know perfectly well that in Hollywood there was some beautiful chick in every studio. They were actresses without a name. For example, one was a Paramount girl and the other was Warner Bros. Girl. Very often there are certain Ukrainian authors that ledge their assault on not very large or well-renowned publishing houses. For instance, an author's work is published exclusively in some particular publishing house. This phenomenon is what's known as the initial Hollywood. So will it develop, or will it always be this way? Does the publishing house have its own well-fed circle of authors who cooperate exclusively with it? Or perhaps these are terms dictated by the publisher saying, if you do not cooperate exclusively with us, you will not have an outlet to Paramount.
Счастливо то издательство, которое в котором сидит человек.
Any owner of a publishing house who sees that a shining star has come to them and convinces them to sign a long-term contract will earn exorbitant profits and live in the lap of luxury. The terms of cooperation may be different. They can be bonded or, on the contrary, they can be quite beneficial for the author. But crafty publishers initially look for people who will shine in the future and try to create with them their own work to attract the interest of potential readers. Indeed, the mechanisms can be completely different. I very much hope that in our country there will be a number of publishers that will agree to work with certain Ukrainian authors that will gain the attention of the general public, through which word of mouth will successfully be spread, and people will then say, yes, indeed, these are brilliant and creative Ukrainian authors whose works are widely published in Folio, Calvare or somewhere else.
В Кальваре или там еще где-то.
Ukraine is finally returning from Asian despots to Europe, and not only in the political or cultural sense, but also in terms of the publishing industry. Ukrainian writers are increasingly seeing their works being published abroad. So the question remains, how can a member of the Ukrainian literati be made not a star of the European literary world? Very often authors complain that they have been deprived of all their rights. They are bound to a contract with strict terms and they cannot write a line without coordinating the content with publishers, while vice versa. Please comment on the following. Perhaps an astute and experienced lawyer can tell us about the relations between an author and a publisher. That is, a writer should come with his lawyer, who should say, "This is Ihor, and he will now talk with you," and vice versa. Or there are such writers and poets. A poet is immersed in creativity, so such person does not understand any legalities, signs a paper in fine print, and then it turns out that all the rights to his poetry belong to the publisher. As far as I understand, the market in Ukraine today is rather chaotic compared to those in other, more developed countries. What are we currently moving towards, and what advice would you offer to authors who decide to turn to a publishing house to have their works printed?
Отвечу сразу на первый вопрос относительно роли юристов в отношениях между автором и издательством.
I will immediately answer your first question regarding the role of lawyers in relation between an author and a publisher. In the West, this function is executed mainly by literary agents, as they are people who are aware of both certain nuances of copyright laws and know the entire behind-the-scenes kitchen of publishers. Accordingly, a writer who has high hopes understands that there is a good chance of selling his or her work and receive some sound advice will most likely turn to such a literary agent, and this person will already professionally represent him for some reward and will say that they're trying to deceive you here, or you need probably to put more pressure on the publishing house, or on the contrary suggest that you not resist at all. Our people do not carry out such functions. We do not have an abundant market where someone works as a literary agent on a permanent basis. In most cases, a lawyer of a neophyte author will most likely not be able to give advice to a client to force a publishing house to comply with their legal rights. The reason being is that a publishing house is a major conglomerate which operates in such a way that is convenient and lucrative for it without any regard to the rights or requests of an author. Well, what about a warning signal or defense? Well, they somehow warn them and clarify what a publisher is offering to cut a deal. The fact is that when publishers usually offer the author something to sell, they usually require that all copies should be sold immediately, because copyright consists of a number of different rights to the works. Accordingly, a publisher is interested in buying the full package. And what does the full package include? Is it poems, a screen version of poems, or something else? What exactly is meant by buying a full package? For example, your poem will be sold in some paper or electronic form. The poem can be used as a piece of a screenplay for a film or some dramatic play on stage. This poem can be given to someone as a gift. Perhaps you can recite the poem to friends or relatives, print it on a poster, pin it up on a wall in your living room, kitchen or bedroom, or post it on the internet. My question to you, how can your poem be paraphrased or translated into some foreign language like Swahili, for example? And all this is taken into account. All this must be taken into account, because the publishing house released it, the book became popular, and the author wants to translate it with another publishing house abroad to release it. Therein lies the question of how lawyers worked and how they correlated the rights of the two parties of the agreement. That is, roughly speaking, if I write Anna Karenina and publish it in our country, I need to see that in the contract it was written that Anna Karenina, say, is not included in Hebrew, and then I can safely publish it in some other country. Well, if you are an author of a book, then you need to discuss these matters in detail. If you have any plans, you need to prescribe them. If with publisher it is enough for you to tell what belongs to you, there is a full list of rights. It is quite long. But if you describe all this in detail, then you have every opportunity to do with it whatever you want.
Возможности в дальнейшем сделать с этим произведением все, что вы захотите.
Знаете, вот страшно напоминать.
You know, that's very reminiscent of the warning about bank loan agreements, where it is always advised to read the so-called fine print, especially in fine print. Frankly, I cannot imagine poets that read through all of this fine print. Although I must admit that you're probably right. A literary agent is a wonderful barrier between the world of the muses and the world of money, and let's hope that they will eventually appear in our country. We have repeatedly said that paperback books are a thing of the past. They are not going into extinction, as far as it may seem, but they are gradually giving way to the high-tech electronic books. This electronic right of authors in our country is some kind of a terra incognita, or a no man's land. Nobody knows better about this than our guest of today's program. Ihor, the question of electronic books. They have become immersed in our everyday lives and will go even further and penetrate even deeper in our minds. And as far as I understand, in general, everything here is very difficult. If I'm not confusing anything, correct me, but unfortunately Ukraine is not yet among one of those countries whose citizens can freely sell their works in the largest electronic stores. To do this, you need to somehow register somewhere in another country. In other words, you can buy, but you cannot sell. And as far as I understand, given the electronic rights in our country, this is something quite unimaginable.
У нас в стране это вообще что-то совершенно невообразимое.
Да, действительно, нашим гражданам и издательствам.
Yes, indeed. It is quite difficult and practically impossible for our citizens and publishers to emerge onto international platforms. There is a number of limitations. First of all, they're created by the platforms themselves. Today there is not a sufficient level of trust in the Ukrainian government and its people. Ukraine has a reputation of a country in which book piracy is rampant. In addition to that, apparently the lack of reliable mechanisms of receiving funds in Ukraine continues to play a very negative role. There are quite a number of obstacles for Ukrainians to receive money from abroad through the standard use of a credit card. I absolutely agree. Our banking legislation in this sense is rather complicated.
Того, какие у нас вообще перспективы и какое у нас состояние, могу подтвердить, что электронные книги у нас действительно скачиваются.
Talking about the prospects we have and the current state we are in, I can say for certain that our electronic books are downloaded. People pay for them. This industry is growing. It will grow. It will grow in proportion to how people use more and more mobile phones and tablets in order to read books. And many prefer this. It's convenient, it's mobile, you do not need to put these volumes in a bag and so on. At this same time in our country, not only in Ukraine, but also in a large number of countries in the post-Soviet space and in the entire world, book bootlegging is a serious problem.
И в принципе по миру существует проблема книжного пиратства. Тут мы не одиноки, опять же таки.
Here we are not alone. Again, we may be high in some ratings, but if it can be a small excuse, we're not the only ones doing this. And on the other hand, the control over the turnover of electronic books is now very actively improving. And the further high-tech develops, the less profitable it will be in terms of logistics to organize such bootleg activities. So it is cheaper for many people just to buy this book for a low price than to look somewhere, perhaps for weeks, where it is available in its electronic version. And in this context, electronic books are a much more lucrative investment of money than paperback books, simply because you do not waste money on printing. This is probably the most important thing. You just upload this book once and that's it. Of course, you wait for some time while others are downloading, but authors gain certain profits as well. After all, if you take the proper approach to this matter Illustrator, the author gains control over how the book is disseminated. He sees how many books are sold, and publishers and readers do not ask, "Oh, well, how many books did you sell? Which stores did you mail them to? Okay then, I will go and check for myself."
Распространяется книга, он видит, сколько продано, у него не возникает вопросов, которые возникают сейчас практически у всех авторов, наверное, сколько книг вы продали, в какие магазины вы их разослали, я сейчас пойду посмотрю.
Well, let's hope this is for the future. In general, it is now upon us, and it must be said that the successes in the fight against piracy in the music industry are impressive. Over the past 10 years, music piracy has been considerably reduced, including in Ukraine. And let us hope that we will soon be able to avoid and deter the spread of book piracy in Ukraine. In closing, I would like to thank you very much for such optimism. This is very important for the publishing industry in Ukraine today. Thank you very much.